Well, thank you so much for joining us. I always appreciate when you take time out of your busy schedules to join us here today. And you will not be sorry you did. We're going to have a really inspirational podcast for you today. And I'm so glad you're here and can't wait for you to hear that episode. But before we dive in, just wanted to share a few ways we can work together. If you happen to be looking to uplevel your negotiation skills so that you can negotiate your best life, which we'll be talking about today, I've got everything from online to my group to my signature VIP and mastermind experiences. It'll help you leverage your innate, that natural power that you have and may not know to be able to get more of what you want and deserve in life. If that sounds interesting to you, check it out at artoffemininenegotiation.com. And now the reason you are all here onto today's program, I am excited to reintroduce you to John Suzuki today. And we're going to be talking today about negotiating better lives through the wisdom of others. So welcome, John. It's great to see you again.
Yes. Hey, Cindy. Great to be here. Thank you.
And for some of you may remember, if you're a regular listener, we had interviewed John not too long ago because about his then new book about American grit from a Japanese American concentration camp, rises an American war hero. We had a really great discussion about that. And for those of you, if you don't know John and you didn't have that opportunity, he is an author, a speaker, a master storyteller, an MC. As I say, he's the author of American Grit. And he is a professional speaker who really inspires his audiences in heartfelt and very insightful ways. And today we're really going to be talking to him and having him share a bit about his podcast. He's the host of a podcast called Finding Better, and it provides weekly doses of inspiration, encouragement. And can't we all use more of that? So, John, why don't you tell us what inspired you to start this podcast? I think you started it after your book took off and was a big hit. What inspired you for Finding Better?
Yeah. 12 years ago, my daughter came up to me and she says, Dad, you have to do a podcast. And my first question was, oh, what the heck is that? And why the heck do I need to do it?
Yeah.
And she says, you have given us and our friends so much great advice over the years. The world
Oh,
needs to hear what you have to say. And this is my daughter,
I
right?
love that.
Yeah, and I said, and in my mind, I'm like, who the heck is going to want to listen to anything I have to say? So I just kind of blew it off.
Yeah.
So in 22, I retired, and in 23, I
Congrats, by
launched
the
my
way.
book.
And double
Huh?
congrats. I say
Yeah,
congrats
thank
and
you.
double
Thank
congrats.
Well, it's amazing how retirement can be so busy. You're doing what you love to do. And
Yeah.
I launched my book in 23, and so about October of last year, she came back up to me out of the blue and said, Dad, what about your podcast? I
Oh,
said,
I love
Kristen, you're bringing that thing up again? And she says, Dad, why aren't you doing this? I said, there's nobody out there that's going to want to listen to anything I have to say. And she says, Dad, listen, just do a podcast and talk to the people, interview people, share your experiences, and give it to the universe.
Oh, I love it.
And those people who need to find you will have a place to find you.
Yeah.
And I just said, oh, I can do that. And so I launched my podcast on January 1st of this year. We just celebrated our 30th episode. And a friend of mine, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and it turned into an argument. And I asked him, I said, David, do you want my opinion or not? And he says, John, I could care less about your opinion, but
Wow.
I'll listen to your experiences all day long. And
Oh,
so that created the method around which I wanted to launch this podcast, was sharing experiences, real life experiences
yeah.
and wisdom that people have gone through in finding better in their own lives, so that people listening can maybe use some of those experiences and find better in their own lives. And so it's just been a joy. And I've been just bringing on amazing people. And it's been a gift to me,
Yeah.
right? Because I have been
I
learning
bet.
so much from the people I've had on board, and it's just wonderful. And it's like I said, it's all about experiences. So it's
Yeah.
really cool.
Oh, and such a gift, right? I mean, what it must be so inspirational and uplifting for you. What a great way to wake up every day knowing that you're going to be able to share and hear all of these stories.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
obviously, I'm a fan, like Finding Better. I think that's just such a beautiful concept, right? And
thank
how do
you.
we find better in those experiences? And why don't you share, like, what made you recognize that, hey, these messages are probably important today, especially? What are your thoughts on that?
I have a couple of values in my life, if you will. I think that we all have three careers. The first career is to learn, the second is to earn, and the third is to return and give back.
I love it.
And I'm in my giving back part
Yeah.
of my life right now. And I also believe from the bottom of my heart that we all share a common purpose, and that is to make the world better than the day we
Mm,
landed on it.
yeah.
And one person at a time, right? If you help somebody and lift somebody, you lift the world.
Yes.
And so, going back to what my daughter said, Dad, who cares how many people want to reach you, to listen to you? If you reach one,
Yeah.
you've done your job.
Yeah.
And so it's been a labor of love. And, Cindy, I don't know about how you feel, but our world is really broken.
Yeah.
It is really, really broken. And technology has had a big part to do with it.
Yeah.
And you look at the rise of technology, you look at the rise of social media, and you look at the rise of mental illness, and they all kind of they all kind of
Yes.
parallel in this
Yeah.
growth path, right?
Absolutely.
And I wanted to provide a place where people can come where no one's where it's okay to be you. It's okay to disagree. It's
Yeah.
okay to not follow everybody else. It's
Yeah.
because we are bombarded with messages of inadequacy. That's what I
Yes.
call it, messages of inadequacy,
Mm,
that we are just thrown into a corner. And on top of that, then the world categorizes us. I call it the bucketizing of America. You
yeah.
have the whites buckets, the black buckets, the
Yeah.
Christian buckets, the
Yeah.
Muslim buckets, the gays, the straights. I mean, everything, right?
Yeah.
And we're all in one bucket.
Yeah.
We're all in one bucket. And so all of those things, I just wanted to provide a safe place where people can come and not be judged
Yeah.
and just learn about other people's experiences and what they've gone through. Oh my gosh. I mean, I've had guests that have brought me to tears,
Yeah. I bet.
and sharing their experiences of what they've been through. And when people hear that stuff and they know that it's real,
Yeah.
I think sometimes people go, maybe I'm okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not all that bad,
Yeah.
and
But
maybe I do
your
deserve to be loved.
perspective is so gorgeous, John. And I just want to really bow down to you for a moment and give you that.
Oh gosh.
No, when you speak, it's a breath of fresh air, and you can tell it's so authentic and sincere and comes from such a place of generosity. And I agree with you. One at a time, right? If we can change that. And you touched on this sort of negativity, right? That we're seeing now, whether on social media, mainstream media, and beyond. So what are some tips that you have or that you've uncovered through your podcast or your life experience on how can we help inspire people to find the better in a world where we're seeing so much negativity today?
Yeah, it's really, really hard because, it's not only negativity that happens at the moment, it's negativity that's part of our culture,
Yeah.
and it's just fired at us all the time.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've learned in my life is that you have choices.
Yeah.
And this is probably the hardest thing for some people to accept.
Yeah.
And that is that your life is the sum of all the decisions that you've made in the past.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say, well, I couldn't decide on my parents and I couldn't decide.
Yeah.
And I get that. I get that. But then Cindy, when I tell folks, do you think, or I ask folks, I say, do you think that the product of your life in the future is going to be directly dependent on the decisions that
Yeah.
you make from here on out? And everybody says yes. Everybody says yes. So if the future is true, the past has to be true
Yeah.
too, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think the biggest for me that I've learned and that I try to share with folks is that the biggest empowerment is understanding that the choice is yours.
Yeah.
And when you hear of other people's experiences, I interviewed somebody who grew up in poverty and grew up in an abusive family, and
Yeah.
they weren't born with a silver spoon in their mouth, and now she runs a multi-million-dollar
Yeah.
company,
Yeah.
and she took it upon herself. She empowered herself, and she says, you know what? It's my choice to
Yeah.
learn. It's my choice to be curious. It's my choice to find a better life. And I really encourage folks, and part of it too, I just mentioned the word curiosity.
Yeah.
Curiosity is a muscle that most of us have gotten pounded out of us,
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's so
right?
important. Yeah.
Right? It's so important. And we're born with an innate curiosity, But when we're told that's a stupid question, or
Yeah.
that's a dumb idea, or what are you talking, right? I mean, it's beaten out of us. And so that curiosity muscle, in terms of negotiating, that is such an important thing to have,
And
right?
not many people recognize that's one of the foundational elements of the art of feminine negotiation is the art of curiosity. Ask more
Yes.
questions. And I want to
Yes.
circle back to that concept of choice because I really would like to put a pin in that for our listeners because I think especially in today's world where we have a lot of that victim mentality, right? And I mean, a lot of the big influencers, sadly, are really jumping on that bandwagon that the more they portray themselves as victim, the more likes they get.
Yes.
Everybody's got the big victim story. And as you were sharing that story about the woman that you had interviewed, it really struck me that because again, I grew up in a very, low rental apartment complex in what was considered a tough neighborhood. We were always struggling for money. And I remember, and not that there wasn't love in the home, but I also remember seeing my parents fight where my dad had my mom by the neck up against the wall with her feet off the
Oh my
ground.
God.
And I could have, as I, went through from, high school to university to law school, and I looked at all of these people who had all of these contacts and all of these, influences and opportunities in their life that I didn't have. Nobody in my extended family had been to university. And I could have had that poor me story and used it as an excuse. Oh, well, I didn't have their contacts. I didn't have this. I didn't have that. Or I could make that choice that you talked about
Yes.
that wasn't gonna stop me, and in fact, I was gonna use that to fuel me to be better and do better, so, I really appreciate you sharing that, and again, for our listeners, I wanna really put a pin in that, and so much of it comes down to that our mindset, right? I think it's one of our most important negotiations, and I'd love you to share maybe some tips you have for our listeners on how do we negotiate that mindset so we can show up as better versions of ourselves? What do you
You know, I've been in legal situations. I am not a litigious guy,
yeah.
but I have been in a few legal situations. And I remember one time the judge, and we're in the middle of an arbitration, and the judge came and said, you know what, the best result that you can ask for, a successful negotiation, is one where neither side is happy. And I said, and I just went,
Oh,
wait,
it's
what?
such a pet peeve of mine you're touching on.
Right? Right? And I had to pause and I go, well, that's a crappy way to look at the world, right?
Yes.
And I mean, one of the themes in my life moving forward is that it's all about heart. It's all about love.
Yeah.
And I when I negotiate in business, I'm always looking for the win-win. I always look for the win-win. And that's where the curiosity muscle comes
Yeah.
in, right?
Yeah.
Being curious about the other side. You know your side,
Yeah.
right? But being curious
Mm.
about the other side and trying to understand what is it that they want. Now there comes a point in time, oftentimes, where you just gotta agree to disagree,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I don't think we do enough. I think there's a lot more that we in general can do
Yeah.
to really understand the other side. And not only involves negotiation and legal situations, but that's, like you say, from the boardroom to the bedroom. It's
Absolutely.
life, right?
Oh,
Being
and John,
curious
you
about,
don't know what you hit on such a pet peeve of mine because 30 years of legal practice, and I've dealt with some who are considered the leading mediators who have said the same thing you did. I know I've done my job when both sides walk away unhappy. And I'm like, we are so conditioned with that fatally flawed
exactly.
logic, right? I mean, if I want X and you want Y, it's not about both sides walking away unhappy because we've had to split the baby. It's what if we get curious, as you've said, and find something better for both of us? How
That's
about that
right.
approach?
That's right. That's right. Because we live in such a world of scarcity.
Yeah.
And and that mindset itself, that
Yes.
mindset of scarcity versus the mindset of abundance,
Yeah.
can change your life.
Yes.
And there's so much out there. There's so much opportunity, and yet we are all living within the confines of what the world has told us we deserve.
And
And
let me touch
Mhm,
on that for 1 second, and sorry, just you've hit on something I think really important. My mind just went poof when you said that, because I know you mentioned love already, and I know you talk a
mhm,
lot about, the secret to our future is less fear and more love, courage, and virtue. And people don't recognize that scarcity. When we talk about scarcity and abundance, I think most people immediately just think about money, but it also applies to there is an abundance of love. We don't have to compete for it, whether it's siblings in the workplace. We don't have to compete for, we can lift each other up. And so I'd love you to speak a bit to that as well, John. I'm sorry to interrupt and finish your thought, but also talk about that love, courage, and virtue and that abundance mindset in those areas, what that can do for us.
Well, for me, I've learned that the opposite of love is not hate.
Mm,
The opposite of love is fear. And when you look at the world, I mean, there is an overabundance of fear and an overscarcity of love.
yeah,
That's the world that
yeah,
we're living in right now. But you know, I have to tell you, 40 years in business, especially over the last 20 years, and with the rise of technology, the rise of this crazy device called the iPhone and smartphones and things like that, have given way to what, you know, you hear data and science. You hear sciences and engineering and mathematics and technology, right? STEM. I believe, and here we are going into a world of artificial intelligence. You know, I've been in technology for 40 years, and this is the first time that I've seen that the most advanced technology that has ever been created can be used now by a 5-year-old.
yeah,
Doesn't require an advanced degree.
yeah.
And my hope is that we're going to see, for a number of reasons, but we're going to see a renaissance of the heart.
No, I hope so.
And yeah, and we have to. And folks like you and I, we're kind of driving. You know,
Doing our part.
it's certainly our political leadership is
Yeah,
not doing it. So
yeah,
it's going to happen from the bottom up.
yeah,
And so, you know, when we think about the abundance versus scarcity, you know, I think the thing is that people just need to know it's there.
yeah,
I think when when
yeah,
when when we can inform people that it's there and it's their choice, and they don't have to succumb to what you called victimhood.
yeah.
You know, I'm working on a TED Talk, and the TED
Can't
Talk is
wait.
called Reversing a Culture of Blame.
Nice,
And you
powerful.
know, the thing is that the whole world, it seems like there's so much blame
Yeah,
going on out there, right?
yeah,
The problem is that when you blame others or other things for your circumstances, you are literally giving away your power to
yeah,
do anything about it,
yeah,
because you're saying it's that person's fault. Isn't that a bad person? As opposed to, you know what, they probably had something to do with it, but I'm going to do something about it.
yeah,
And blame leads to victimhood.
yeah,
And you talk about the rise of victimhood, right? And so reversing that blame, and that's a big underlying message of my book,
yeah,
where here they are, 120,000 people were minding their business one day and found themselves in American concentration camps the
yeah,
next day. And a lot of them did blame. A lot of them were victims, but there were those thousands who refused to blame, refused to be victims, and they empowered themselves
yeah,
to go out and prove their loyalty to this country. And they came out of World War II having fought for the United States, the same army that put them and their families in those
yeah.
camps to begin with.
Remarkable.
And they
Yeah,
were some of the most decorated war heroes of all
yeah,
time. And
yeah,
so the underlying message to my book is, don't be a victim.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, it's your choice.
I
And
love your
so
book for that. And that blame ties directly back to choice. I like that you said that because when we're so busy blaming everybody else, we're actually stripping ourselves of our own choice, right? To be able
exactly.
to show up differently. And I want to tie that back. First of all, I love when you say the opposite of love is not hate, it's fear. I want to really
Mhm.
remind our audience, our listeners of that. The opposite of love is not hate, it is fear. And a little cautionary tale, I'd say for our listeners out there, I really invite you pay attention to the sources in your life who are fear mongering. And when you see, whether it's the media, whether it's politicians, whether it's big business, when we're seeing a climate of fear mongering, your alarm bell should immediately go off because that is not a productive, constructive, empowering approach to life. So and I love that your book and your podcast really points that out. And I know you're a big advocate and you've mentioned about empowerment. Can you share a few sort of self-empowerment techniques or strategies that you've learned through your experiences?
So I've been born a certain way. And And my wife calls me a dog with a squirrel. Squirrel, squirrel, squirrel. And I see a squirrel and I go chasing it. I just do.
Yeah.
And so for me, the idea of going for it is just part of who I am.
Yeah.
But the thing is that for me, okay, one of the things I tell people is that if you're not succeeding, you're not failing enough.
Yeah. That's good.
And people are really fearful of failing, of failure, of rejection. You think about the things that we fear. They are some of the most disempowering things
Yes.
on our planet. What are they going to think of me? What they're going to think I'm stupid, whatever, right? And we have this self-talk in our head that we're not good enough.
Yeah.
One of the most empowering things that I realized in my life, and this happened a long time ago, is just to go for it. Because if you fail, or if people are laughing at you, okay, you learn one way it doesn't
Absolutely.
work,
Yeah.
right? And the old Thomas Edison thing, where he was asked, how does it feel to fail over 1,000 times in inventing the filament? And he says, I didn't fail 1,000 times. I just learned 1,000 different ways the thing didn't work.
Yeah.
And so if you give yourself permission, and that's what it takes, it's giving yourself permission
Yeah.
to be foolish. I'm a doofus. I mean, I'm just, you know, I'm just out there, and I like to make people happy. That's one of the things I like to do. And when I'm speaking in front of the audience, in front of a large audience, in my head, my challenge to myself is to make these people smile and laugh,
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
right?
you do that easily. I have no
Yeah, well, thank you, thank you.
doubt.
And so I think so for me, one of the most empowering things to do is not to disempower yourself with the fear of failure.
Yeah. I love that. What a great reframe, right? That empowerment is failure. Like failure is the path to empowerment.
Failure is exactly, empower yourself with failure.
Yeah, it's so powerful. That's we got to get t-shirts made out. You could trademark that, John. Trademark that. No, you've talked about polarization a bit. It's, sort of come up directly and indirectly in our conversation here. So what tips do you have for negotiating past this kind of, and you talked about curiosity, obviously super important. Anything else you'd add to that about how we help negotiate past this kind of divisiveness that we're seeing?
Yeah, I talked about the buckets.
Yeah.
Right. I was having a conversation with a gentleman who was one of the senior people responsible for diversity, equity, and inclusion at Microsoft.
Yeah.
And he and I were talking about it. And one of his biggest of those three was inclusion and belonging.
Yeah.
And that is to me too, helping people feel like they belong there.
Yeah.
But during our conversation, he was talking about Asians
Yeah.
and how I felt about being a person of color. And I told him, I said, you know what? I said, I have never known a Japanese person or a Korean person or a Vietnamese person or a Chinese person to identify themselves as Asian.
Yeah.
I've always known them to say, I'm Japanese, I'm
Yeah.
Korean, I'm Chinese, I'm Taiwanese. And
Yeah.
yet we put all these people into this bucket
Pocket.
of Asians. We
Yeah.
don't even speak the same language.
Language. That's true.
Set aside the culture.
Yeah.
And a lot of us don't like each other. Yeah, even within the same culture, right? And so, I've never known a person from Scandinavia or a Romanian or an English person or a Russian to identify themselves as white.
Yeah.
I just haven't. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
And so the thing about it is that we have to stop categorizing people. My own personal experience was when one day, this was 20 years ago, I'm at a company celebration, and one of the senior executives came running up to me and says, John, hey, I just wanted to talk with you. I said, yeah, what's going on? She says, I wanted to let you know that we've got this new club where you can be with your own people.
Oh.
And I said,
Oh.
my own people?
Oh my
And she says,
God.
yeah, yeah, completely well intended. I
Yeah,
mean, I
like
get that,
the
right?
path to hell.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
And so, but I told the next day I found my boss and I told him, I said, Mike, I guess I'm a person of color. I said, and I guess I'm supposed to be treated differently.
Yeah, oh.
I
Yeah.
said, until last night, I never, it just,
That never crossed my mind.
that never crossed my mind. Right. And I'll also say something that might not make some people happy. But as an Asian, I guess, or Japanese American, that
Yeah.
a lot of Asian groups talk about Asian hate.
Yeah.
And honestly, from the perspective that I hold,
Yeah.
I've never seen it.
Huh.
I've certainly never experienced it.
Yeah.
And and there's a knee-jerk reaction of, if somebody attacks an older Asian person, it must be Asian hate.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? That same bad guy might have attacked an older
Yeah.
Mexican woman, or an older white woman, or
Yeah.
another older black. You know, they just might be a bad guy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so the thing is that if you're looking for it, you're going to see it.
Yeah.
If
Well, and
you're
I love your
looking for,
bike it approach. I think that's a really important point that you're trying. I'm glad you're out there talking about it because as you're saying it, it really hit me that that does account for a lot of the divisiveness that we're seeing when we
it
put each
totally
other in
does.
buckets and we then stay within a bucket and we identify within buckets or identify others within buckets and make all of these assumptions about
Exactly.
them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I don't want anybody to make assumptions about who I am by the way I look.
Yeah.
And yet that's what we're being trained to do. That's
Yeah.
what DEI is all about. And it's being sent. And I get there's an overriding positive intent,
Yeah.
but there's also a balance that we need to
Yeah.
strike. And I go back to that guy. Martin Luther King is up on my wall. And it goes back to, don't judge a person by the color of their skin, but judge a person by the content of their character.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so, that's a long way of answering a relatively simple question that you asked, is how do we get back to this? And that is, look at people as individuals.
Yeah.
Start there.
Yeah.
Start there. If you then have to put them into some bucket somewhere,
Yeah.
okay, but get to know them first. Get
That's
to know
such a
them first.
great message. And what a great path to positivity. And speaking of positivity, do you have like one of the most inspiring stories or one that really resonated with you, message that you've heard on your podcast?
Yes, yes. So one that just overall, over everything, was a young woman who, her name was Molly, or is Molly, and when she was 23 years old, she decided to race the world's toughest horse race called the Mongol Derby. It's 1,000 kilometers
Yes.
across Mongolia as a
Yeah.
23-year-old, on feral horses, having to switch horses every night for 10 nights. And these are
Wow.
semi-wild horses. It's not her
Yeah.
own horse.
Yeah.
So anyway, she's on this trip, and on her ninth day, she got massively sick. It
Yeah.
was the water, it was the food, it was a combination of a whole bunch, and she was exhausted.
Yeah.
And somehow out there, they had internet connectivity, and she got onto Facebook, and two of her friends got on and said, "Oh my gosh, Molly, you are so amazing. You're going through this race. You only have 1 or 2 days left. We are so proud of you." And
Uh,
at that moment, she realized in her heart that she wasn't a lazy person.
mhm.
And she wasn't, and she hated all her life. She had identified with herself as being a lazy person.
Oh, wow.
And it was on this ninth day, 1 or 2 days before the end
Yeah.
of the race, that she learned no lazy person would be doing what I'm
I was
doing.
thinking that
Right?
1,000 miles on
I
feral
mean,
horses.
exactly. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And so during the podcast, she says, "Yeah, and that's what I learned." I said, "Molly." And she says, "What's that?" I said, "I think maybe you learned to love yourself that
Yeah.
day."
Yeah. Oh,
And she just paused,
yeah.
and she said, "Yeah,
Yeah.
I learned to love myself."
Yeah.
And one of my favorite songs of all, as dorky as this may sound, is the late great Whitney Houston's "The Greatest Love of All."
Yeah.
Learning to love yourself, it is the
So
greatest love of
true.
all.
And we
And
don't teach that, you
we
know?
don't,
We
we
don't. That
don't.
that should be in every elementary school from the youngest possible age to be teaching them to love themselves unconditionally.
And every family should be teaching their children
Yeah,
that all the
absolutely.
time. And from that point on, her life has been amazing.
That's
And
gorgeous.
and that was probably the most powerful
Oh,
episode that we've done so far.
well, and kudos to you to be able to crystallize that for her. That's so beautiful. Now, I know you often say it's what you leave behind that really matters. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So Denzel Washington is my favorite actor.
Okay.
And I love his acting. I love his
Yeah.
character of helping the underdog, the equalizer and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, right? But I also like him because he's a really deep person.
Yeah.
So I watch his YouTube videos,
Yeah.
and one of the things he said, and it was very, very quick. He says, you can't take it with you, but you can leave it behind.
Aw, nice. So
And
simple. Yeah.
right. And we always hear you can't take it with you. You can't take it with you, right? But he added, but you can leave it behind.
That's nice.
You can leave behind something
Yeah.
that you remember for. You can leave behind a legacy.
Yeah.
So just know, for me, what that means is just know that no matter what you do, no matter who you are leaving something behind.
Yeah.
So make it good.
Yeah. Oh,
Make it good.
yeah. And it's so simple. It's just get more intentional, right? Choose who you want to be and find
Yes.
better, which, like your
Yes.
podcast, find better.
And
Well,
just
this is, yeah.
one step at a time,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you don't have to go from where you are now to better overnight. It's
Yeah.
just, you know, figure out the path and follow that path. And just as you said, choose.
Yeah.
Choose. It's your choice, you
And
know?
it's such simple logic and yet so powerful and sadly rarely seen. So you keep doing what you're doing out there, John. We love it. And as you know, I normally like to end by saying you've already given us so many great mindset shifts, but what would you consider one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've had in your life? Doesn't have to be on anything we've talked about today necessarily.
The one that just comes out just flashed in my head.
Yep.
Happened to me when I was probably maybe 6 years old.
Wow.
I'm minding my
That's
own
a,
business and I see this bumper sticker.
yeah.
And this bumper sticker is this with great big happy face with great big teeth with a giant rainbow over his face. And the word said, smile. It no going broke your face. It was a Hawaiian bumper sticker. Smile. It's not going to broke your face, right? And that I just I said I remember saying to myself, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And I've held that ever since.
It's
I
beautiful.
mean, what's the alternative, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And just the expression makes you smile, which is kind of gorgeous in itself,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's so funny. So where
Yeah.
can people learn more about you, John? You've got so many amazing insights to share with the world. You're doing such great things. Where can people
Well,
find out
thank
more
you.
about you?
They can go to johnsuzuki.com, just like the motorcycle
Yeah.
Suzuki. You can also my podcast is called Finding Better. And I put my podcast on YouTube and yeah,
Nice.
yeah. So
Yeah.
but the easiest thing to do is just go to my website at
Beautiful.
johnsuzuki.com, and then it'll show you all the other stuff that's going on.
Perfect. And we'll make sure to put that in the show notes for everybody. I really invite you to go check it out. And as always, I love talking to you, John. You are just a breath of fresh air. And so thank you for sharing with our audience here today. I so appreciate you.
Well, thank you for having me, Cindy. I love you.
Yeah,
It's always
likewise.
wonderful to be with you, and I appreciate it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and for our listeners, if you walk away from this thinking you didn't get value, then you got to listen to it again because there was so much value here, some incredible perspectives and simple shifts that you can implement like right away as soon as you finish listening to this to make your life better so that you can find better. Make sure to give the gift of sharing as well. Share this episode with other people to help uplift them. As John says, one at a time, you can make a difference in the world. And make
That's
sure
right.
to grab a copy of my book if you haven't done that yet, Art of Feminine Negotiation. Make sure to grab a copy of John's book. We'll put that in the show notes. And that is a wrap for this episode. Until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can stop missing out and start getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom. Until next time, take care.